Hi, this is Peg Dawson. I'm a psychologist at Seacoast Mental Health Center in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Also the co-author of several books on executive skills, including one on coaching students with executive skills deficits. This PowerPoint is intended to act as an introduction to executive skills that will serve as background information for a program to train coaches to work with teenagers who are struggling in school because of weak executive skills. This training program is being run both as part of an online interactive seminar and as a self-study seminar. The PowerPoint is an introduction to both seminars. In this brief introduction, I will describe 11 executive skills that we think have the biggest impact on academic performance. I will then talk about how key brain processes support executive skill development, followed by a closer look at what's going on in adolescent development that affects how they acquire and use these executive skills. Finally, I'll talk about how coaching is uniquely suited to support executive skill development during the teen years. Before we go any further, let me give you 3 key pieces of information about executive skills. First of all, they are brain-based skills. They are managed out of the frontal lobes of the brain, which is the part of the brain right behind the forehead, and they take a minimum of 25 years to reach full maturation. Secondly, until they are fully mature, it's our job as parents or adults who work with kids to act as surrogate frontal lobes for our kids. We basically lend them our frontal lobes. And I think we do this quite naturally when children are young, but somewhere around middle school, though, things might begin to go wrong, both because we don't fully understand adolescence and because there's a pretty big mismatch between what we expect teens to manage, keep track of, remember, plan, and organize and do, and what their brains are comfortable doing at that point. This mismatch affects kids with learning or attention problems, but it can also affect teens who are up until middle school did not have significant problems in school. Thirdly, we cannot act as surrogate frontal lobes for kids forever because then we'd have to follow them around for the rest of their lives. So it's also our job as parents or adults who work with kids to make sure they develop their own fully functioning executive skills. In so doing, we accomplish a goal that's as important to kids as it is to their parents. Kids become independent and self-sufficient adults. Our model of executive skills focuses on the 11 skills that we think have the biggest impact on school performance. Recently, I've begun talking about them in 2 clusters. The first cluster includes earlier developing executive skills, which I call foundational skills. They are listed here in the order in which we think they emerge developmentally, beginning shortly after birth. In many cases, they are building blocks for the 5 later developing skills, which I refer to as advanced skills. Here, the order in which I've listed them is somewhat more arbitrary. I say this because there's a thread of metacognition running through all of these later skills. Metacognition is a late developing skill itself, and once students begin to acquire this skill, it makes learning all the other advanced skills easier. With the next few slides, I will briefly describe each skill, and we'll talk about how the coaching process may facilitate the development of each. So let's get started. Response inhibition is generally considered the first skill to emerge. It's the ability to think before you act or resist the urge to say or do something until you've had a chance to evaluate the situation. Many students use coaching to make daily plans and to follow through on them, thus learning to avoid the temptation to engage in more appealing tasks in order to complete the daily tasks they've set for themselves. That resisting temptation is basically at the heart of response inhibition. Working memory is the next executive skill. It includes both the ability to hold information in mind while performing complex tasks, as well as the ability to draw on past experience to help us handle the situation at hand. Asking students to make daily plans prompts them to remember all the work they have to do, including both nightly homework as well as long-term tasks such as projects and tests. The daily plan itself serves to jog the student's memory to ensure that work is completed as scheduled. Emotional control refers to the ability to manage your emotions so that they don't get in the way of completing tasks or controlling behavior. Some students may specifically target emotional control as a goal of coaching, but even if it's not a target, through the coaching process, students may learn to manage frustration associated with obstacles that get in the way of goal attainment or the completion of daily plans. Flexibility refers to the ability to adjust to changes in plans or to change strategies when the first attempt is unsuccessful. Students with weaknesses in this skill practice it through managing obstacles and changes in plans as they arise, but if necessary, through the coach working with them on how to handle assignments such as open-ended tests that are often difficult for inflexible students. Sustained attention refers to the ability to stick with a task even when one is feeling tired, bored, or distracted. By asking students to complete a daily plan, students practice seeing tasks through to completion despite obstacles or competing interests. And because they've worked with their coach and have committed to following that plan, that increases the likelihood that they can sustain attention to it. Task initiation is basically the opposite of procrastination. Students may be quite good at initiating tasks that hold their interest, but they are frequently given work to do in school that they don't find naturally appealing. By asking students to identify when they plan to start the task, they learn to follow through on tasks and to begin them in a timely fashion. Planning refers to the ability to set out the steps necessary to complete a task. Prioritizing is a significant part of planning because to do planning well requires zeroing in on the most important steps so that the plan can be completed efficiently. Critical to our coaching process is creating a SMART goal that is specific enough that it can be translated into an action plan or a set of action plans required to achieve the SMART goal. There's a key word in our definition of organization. The definition is the ability to create and maintain systems to keep track of information or materials. The key word is maintain. Most students who struggle with organization particularly struggle with the maintenance aspect to it. If a student has problems with organization and identifies a goal connected to it, the coach may help them design and maintain systems such as keeping files in their computers organized or keeping desks, notebooks, or backpacks neat and tidy. Time management actually incorporates a number of the executive skills we've already talked about. This skill involves task initiation, sustained attention, and planning, along with an additional skill that's unique to time management, and that's time estimation. When coaches are making daily plans with students, they're often asking them to estimate how long each task will take, and to see whether they were right in making that estimate. We also ask them to think about how they can work around non-school activities such as jobs, sports, or family obligations. So all of those require one to develop a more sophisticated sense of time and how the tasks you have to accomplish fit into the time you have available. Goal-directed persistence really represents the overarching purpose of coaching and was the jumping-off point as my colleague Dr. Guare and I developed our coaching model originally. We saw that with many students there was a disconnect between where they wanted to end up when they finished school and how they were spending their time on a daily basis. We begin our coaching process, at least with high school and college students, with a discussion about what they want to do with the next stage of their life. We have found through years of experience with coaching, however, that it's best not to dwell on the long-term goal. But we can build goal-directed persistence by asking kids to set shorter-term goals and to experience success with achieving those shorter-term goals and to build up that history of success. And then finally, we come to metacognition. This is basically the ability to see the big picture, to understand how all the pieces fit together. It incorporates self-monitoring and self-evaluative skills. As I said earlier, metacognition is incorporated into the other advanced executive skills because all of them require considering multiple elements or multiple variables. In coaching students, we ask them to think about obstacles that might interfere with achieving goals or completing daily plans, which requires some degree of reflection. We also ask students to reflect on the process, to identify strategies that work, those that don't work, and to engage in problem solving whenever obstacles arise. All of that is basically metacognition. Okay, now let's talk about what's going on in the brain that supports executive skill development. There are a number of brain processes involved, but a good place to start is with myelination. Myelin is a fatty sheath that wraps itself around nerve cells, and each time a nerve cell fires, a little more myelin builds up. In this electron microscope picture of nerve cells, the nerve cell itself is the dark center, and myelin is the lighter part surrounding the nerve cell. Myelin acts roughly like insulation on an electric cord. So the thicker the myelin, the faster the impulse travels. And the faster the impulse travels, the better the skill. And we should remember that all skills improve with practice, not just executive skills. The more you practice, the better the skill, and practice also makes the skill less effortful, because basically myelin performs two functions. It increases the speed with which nerve cells fire, and it decreases the recovery time, enabling the nerve cell to fire again more quickly. As a result, when you have a fully myelinated nerve cell, you have a 3,000-fold increase in the amount of information transmitted per second. Now, there are two other brain processes that improve the brain's ability to handle complexity. One of them is pruning. Pruning is the sloughing off of unused nerve cells and synapses that allow the remaining cells to work more efficiently. So in this picture here, which was taken from the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University, on the left-hand side, you can see what neural connections look like at birth. Although we have billions of neurons in our brain, they are not connected. It is through experience and learning that synaptic connections emerge and strengthen and expand. So you can see at age 6, there are many more synaptic connections. With too many synaptic connections, however, the brain works inefficiently. And so the pruning that's involved that supports executive skill development happens somewhere around puberty. And so that's what you see in the picture on the right. There are fewer neural connections. And so once you discard or get rid of or prune excess neural connections, we know that the ones that remain work way better. They transmit larger volumes of information, they transmit it more rapidly, and they connect with more distant regions of the brain. So that the other brain changes that improves the brain's ability to handle complexity is increased connectivity between different regions of the brain, allowing the brain to handle more complexity, basically the higher order thinking skills required for metacognition. And let me just explain this one other chart, which addresses the whole issue of neuroplasticity. So until recently, neuroscientists thought that once we reached adulthood, the brain no longer continued to change. We now know that's not true. The brain can change until the day we die. But the nature of the plasticity changes as with age. So the dark red line in this chart shows how malleable the brain is, or how easily experience changes the brain. And if you look at that, in the very early years, the brain is highly malleable and changes very easily as a result of experience alone. But this drops off with age. But at least through late adolescence, the effort required to change the brain is fairly low. And that's what that light red line refers to. That's measuring the physiological effort required to enhance neural connections. And the way we measure physiological effort is glucose consumption, because glucose is basically the fuel that powers the brain. And so what that light red line shows you is throughout the first decade, even the first 2 decades of life, learning new skills or acquiring new habits is relatively easy, does not require a huge amount of glucose or physiological effort. But as we age, more effort is required, more glucose is burned. So once you reach adulthood, the effort you need to expend to change the brain, or behavior for that matter, increases substantially, as you can see there. That's why, in part, learning a second language at age 50 is much harder than learning a second language at age 5. It just requires a whole lot more effort. Adolescence is an ideal time to work on behavior change. Pruning helps the brain work efficiently, and neuroplasticity makes it easier to change than it ever will be again. Another thing happening in adolescence is changes in how neurotransmitters operate. Neurotransmitters are what get transported across those synaptic connections, and there are 2 key neurotransmitters that are particularly affected by puberty. One is dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that enhances the level of interest you attach to a stimulus. And teens are primed to seek out experiences that maximize dopamine. That helps explain the risk-taking that goes on often at that age. Serotonin also plays a role and has a particular impact on mood, impulse control, and arousal levels. With the decrease in serotonin that occurs in adolescence comes decreased impulse control. Furthermore, the connection at this age is fairly tenuous between the prefrontal cortex, where executive skills, including response inhibition and emotional control, reside, and the limbic system, which governs the expression of emotions. This leads to, in teenagers, a reliance on a more emotional brain, which results in quickness to anger, intense mood swings, and decision-making based on gut feelings, as well as increased hot versus cool cognition, much more thinking going on under conditions of high arousal and intense emotions, those are not the best conditions to do good thinking. Which connects to a picture and a statement, a quote I found on a Parade magazine article several years ago that I really liked. Basically what this says is the teenage brain is like a Ferrari. It's sleek, shiny, sexy, and fast, and it corners really well, but it also has really crappy brakes. When kids hit their teen years, their brains are primed for sensation seeking and following impulses, but school is asking them to engage often in relatively boring tasks and to squelch their natural inclination to follow their urges and give in to temptations. Some students juggle these two competing demands or interests well, while others struggle. And they struggle primarily because of immature executive skills. If we want to help kids with weak executive skills, we basically have three options. We can modify the environment to reduce the impact of weak executive skills. We can teach the teen the weak skill or the skill that they're missing. Or we can motivate the child to use the skill that they have, but it's effortful because it's in his early stages. But if we can find an incentive to get them to practice, then the practice obviously will enhance the skill. So basically, coaching is the vehicle for supporting these strategies. Coaching has become a fairly common term. If you Google it, you'll find references to executive coaches, life coaches, and ADHD coaches, among other things. And every coach or coaching organization has a different definition for what coaching is. Our coaching process, which is described in detail in our books, is an intervention strategy in which a coach works with a student to set goals, long-term, short-term, or daily, designed to enhance executive skills and lead to improved self-regulation. So here's why we think coaching is well suited to the developmental stage of adolescence. I think it can serve six purposes. It moves the student away from reliance on his parents for supervision around schoolwork. It gives the student some control over their choices. It helps the student learn to make good decisions about how they study. It helps students learn to evaluate their own performance and make plans for improvement. It gives students the tools they need to achieve both success and autonomy. It helps students set goals that are student-driven and provides feedback about their success. So with this introduction to coaching, as I say, our coaching seminar is both the interactive one and the one that will involve live interaction between myself, which is the one that will involve live interaction between myself and the 20 participants who enrolled in the class, as well as the self-study seminar, which will give participants the opportunity to practice this technique in a step-by-step fashion and to learn how coaching works for themselves. This PowerPoint is the introduction for both of those, and I look forward to further contact with you either through the self-study or through the interactive seminar.